Just one day after the release of a scathing House ethics report, the head of the committee introduced an expulsion resolution against Republican Congressman George Santos. So for more on this, let's bring in our political panel. Joel Payne is the Chief Communications Officer for Move On and a CBS News political contributor. And Leslie Sanchez is a Republican strategist and a CBS News political analyst. Thanks for joining us, guys. So last night on America Decides, New York Republican Congressman Mike Lawler responded to Santos. A lot of stuff happened with Santos yesterday, but one of the things that we learned was that he was not going to run for re-election. We want to play some of what Lawler had to say.
At the end of the day, he was never going to be on the ballot in 2024. He would have lost a Republican primary, but very gracious of him to understand that he will not be running for re-election in 2024. He should do more than that and resign effective immediately.
So, Leslie, this is for you. It's actually only really recently that we're hearing other Republicans say, you need to leave and you need to leave now. There was a feeling that Republicans were so wanted to keep that seat and keep that vote that they were willing to let him do almost anything. Have the tides turned?
Well, if you remember, he was a critical vote that they were relying on when Speaker McCarthy was running for Speaker, right? Every vote counted, and they couldn't lose one. The second part for Republicans' argument was they wanted that due process. They wanted the full investigation, the time for the Ethics Committee to unravel what kind of the suggested discrepancies between what he did and what they said he did and what he actually did. Now that you have a full report in black and white, it's a lot more difficult for Republicans or anybody really to stand by him. So they support his desire to not run again, but it's going to the pressure is going to increase for him to step down and not force Republicans to take that vote. It's not a vote they're going to want to take, but they will take it to remove him.
So, Joel, how could Santos's removal or resignation shift the power in Congress? I mean, the Republicans would still have a majority, albeit a slim one. Slimmer.
Yeah, I think, Vlad, to that point, to Leslie's point, I mean, Republicans were relying on that vote, like literally to cling on to a very narrow majority. I think it mattered a lot to Kevin McCarthy in a precarious political situation. Maybe it matters a little less to Mike Johnson, although I'm sure they'd still like to figure out how to keep that seat in Republican hands. But this all comes down to the fact that he is a liability now for Republicans all across the country, but also Republicans in New York. You showed the footage of Mike Lawler. He is a fellow New York Republican. And those are seats that Republicans know are among the frontline seats that Democrats are going to be going after in 2024. And the fact that Republicans lined up behind and for a long time stood behind George Santos is a political liability. Mike Lawler knows it. The other New York Republicans know it. Other vulnerable Republicans know it. And I think you're going to see a very quick distancing of those who have real political concerns about what George Santos could mean for the Republican brand.
Leslie, let's talk about this short-term spending bill. They managed to pass a bill to keep the government up and running until at least the new year. It doesn't include funding for Israel, doesn't include funding for the border or Ukraine. And Mike Johnson, the new speaker, it was a big test for him, and he got some backlash because he had to work with Democrats to get it passed. But now, the real work begins. Now he's really going to have to start hammering out a more long-term deal. What's going to happen with Johnson? Is he going to face the same criticism that McCarthy faced if he has to continue to, lo and behold, work across the aisle?
Well, I think when did that become taboo?
Right?
It's a pejorative. That's so bad. And the bottom line, darned if you do, darned if you don't, right? If the government closes down, Republicans know the aftermath of that, the ramifications, especially during the holiday season. There is no patience or tolerance on any side of the aisle to see that happen. So on that front, it was an accomplishment. It moves it out of this critical time and allows time to separate some of those things Republicans have talked about and balance this out. They're going to want offsets. It may be political posturing at the end of the day. There will be some concessions, but breaking it down and taking time to have this Israel vote, the separate spending on Ukraine, and really tackle the border, Republicans feel is going to give them an advantage to specifically lining those items out collectively when they get to the ballot box in November. So I think that's really why you're seeing this pushed to the right.
Joel, let me ask you about the news this week that Senator Joe Manchin will not run for re-election. How would, if you're speculating here, but how could this impact the Democrats' control of the Senate and further out the presidential election?
I think Joe Manchin is probably the only Democrat that most national Democrats have confidence could hold that seat. So I think that significantly changes the Senate math in 2024. Seats like Sherrod Brown in Ohio, Jon Tester in Montana become real priorities to keep. There are not that many Republican seats that are in play, maybe a Ted Cruz in Texas. You'll see some progressives and Democrats go after that seat. And you'll also see maybe some attention to Rick Scott in Florida. But those are relatively safe seats in this political environment. I think Democrats understand that they are facing a significant uphill battle to keep the Senate majority. And I think Manchin's news doesn't impact or doesn't positively impact that in any way. I do think that now Manchin enters conversations about his national ambitions as potentially a third party candidate. And he's going to be courted by some, but mostly he's going to do his favorite thing, which is be Joe Manchin and get asked questions about his political future, which I think we found to be kind of DC's favorite parlor game of the last few years.
And to that point, also journalists' favorite parlor games, asking him over and over and over and over again ad nauseum, and him just stringing us along like the suckers that we are. Joel, Leslie, thank you very much. Appreciate your time always. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.